Do you like numbers, aprons, hard cap triggers, trade machines, and dead cap figures? Turn our trash into a treasure. Now here for your listening pleasure. Woo! It's Fear the Fro with Bobby Marks. It's a CBA world.
It's a lot of money.
Where should we start? So settle in and grab a pen, cause we're talking about the aprons all over again. Yay!
Yes, sir!
Welcome to the Fear the Fro podcast, a very special podcast. We've been laying low for a couple weeks since the end of the season, but as we approach the offseason here, as the NBA Finals comes to a close in the coming weeks here, even more attention is going to be paid to our Cavaliers. And today, joining me on the podcast, a very special guest, a man I'm very excited to talk to from ESPN, Bobby Marks. Thank you for taking the time.
Well, that was some intro. I've never had that before. You know, listen, we've had that intro, and then my friends at NBA Today created a touchscreen intro for me it was like a gumball machine, I think, during the year. So I like the music a lot better, though. There was like this was like someone like actually created this from scratch.
That's right, Bobby. That's actually my day job, is making these little jingles and things. So talking about the Cavs is just my passion. The production side of it is the other part of my world. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is, as we get to this offseason, you did a preview recently, which I'm sure a lot of our audience has seen, about the Cavs offseason outlook. And I think a good place I wanted to start was, I mean, everybody's familiar with your work, you know, as a media analyst, a cap analyst, but you had a whole life before that, where you were with the Brooklyn Nets. Before we jump into the specifics, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you kind of arrived where you are in terms of, you know, getting into the front office side of things and then making the transition to doing what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, so I played football in college. I needed to do an internship because my grades were not great. I went to Marist College up in Poughkeepsie, New York. Really was behind from a credit standpoint. I needed an internship. Fortunately, got one with the Nets in '95 in public relations. I parlayed that into working for free in basketball ops, and then got hired in basketball ops in January of '96, and really just kind of worked my way up the food chain with the Nets. Did not go to law school, basically self-taught the CBA myself. Worked for a lot of different coaches. I would say the interest of the CBA and how the rules work and trades probably started in 2000. That was Byron Scott's first year. That's when Rod Thorne came aboard in New Jersey. I worked for John Calipari for 3 years when he was the head coach and vice president. And basically that was kind of like glorified like manager, I guess, like if you were doing that from a college perspective, where you were basically doing everything and anything, and it was like survival, right? Like just kind of getting through, but I learned a ton. And so that was my journey, how I kind of learned how the CBA worked and the trades and free agency and the draft and all the nuances of basketball operations, besides the other 30 things I was doing with the Nets. And then certainly have been through a lot of different CBAs, been through a bunch of lockouts, got promoted in 2010 when Billy King came on as assistant GM. And when my option in 2015, it was almost like we almost hit the 10-year anniversary. When my option from the Nets was not exercised, it was like, what do you do next, right? Like we all I always say we all go through a phase where everyone's going to have a part 2 or part 3 of their life. Unfortunately for me, it was when I was 42 and I had 2 young kids at home, right? So it's like, oh wow, that was something different. So you always think like you're going to go back working for a team, and to do so, you would probably have to relocate somewhere. And fortunately for me, I was still getting paid by the Nets, and fortunately for me, I didn't have that desire to jump right back in, and I started to go on our favorite thing, which is Twitter. And that was the summer of 2015, and that's when we had a 140-word limit. And people were probably a lot nicer. And I went on Twitter, and I basically provided a free service for everyone. And I would break down how each trade worked and how the CBA impacted it and how much money the Cavaliers had in the summer of 15 and what they could go out in free agency and kind of pulled back the curtain from a front office perspective and gave you like a look, right? And so that's how that started. And it started with 140 followers, because when you work for a team, you don't go on Twitter and you don't tweet about game recaps or what the Nets are going to do in free agency. And it has grown to, I think we're over 300,000. So, but that was kind of like my introductory to like the media world a little bit here, because I was providing this free service, but I'm thinking like, wait a minute, like eventually I'm going to probably need to get a job. So like, what do we do? And then I had never really done TV before. Fortunately, I did a couple of hits with ESPN through Mark Stein, who was at the time at ESPN. And I was like, wow, this could be something, but they weren't hiring. So we kept on going on Twitter. Fortunately, in the world of networking and knowing people, Adrian Wojnarowski was a beat writer at one time, or a columnist at one time for the Bergen Record in New Jersey. And I got to know Woj during the years we went to the finals, and he covered us. And I saw him on the concourse of Summer League in 2015. He's like, man, I love what you're doing on Twitter and stuff. Would you ever have any interest coming to the media world? And I was like, oh, maybe. He goes, well, I'm starting this group at Yahoo called The Vertical, and it's myself, and there's like this 21-year-old kid who goes to like Loyola Chicago named Shams Charania, and Jonathan Gavoni and Mike Schmitz, and we want a front office person. And I was like, wow. Flew out to California, met with Yahoo, and they offered me, which is rare, a kind of a job on the spot. And they said to me, well, you got to write though. And I was like, whoa, 140 characters? No. And I had never wrote, I don't even know if I even wrote a paper in college. Maybe I did. I don't remember it. So writing for me is totally new. And that's been kind of my 10-year journey as far as how to write articles, how to break down, how to make it sense for people at home, because we're dealing with these complex set of rules. And we were with Yahoo for 2 years. And that was kind of like my baptism as far as how to go about writing a story and how to kind of give you more than 140 characters about how rosters are built or trades and off-season articles and all that. And fortunately for us, we had a really blank slate at Yahoo. And, there was 8 of us, and there was 43 people at ESPN, right? So we were allowed to do a lot of different things because we did streaming. We went against the draft. We did all these different we did a free agent show, all these things. And finally, ESPN came in 2017, and they said, well, we want you guys to come over. And some of us were able to go, and some of us couldn't. I think there was 4 of us, including myself and Woj, that went to ESPN. And that was kind of my journey as far as where I am. I think this is going into my 9th offseason with ESPN. My first was the Paul George trade from Indiana to OKC, not the OKC, the Clipper one, but the Indiana to OKC. And I love when there's new CBAs out. I mean, because it gives me the opportunity.
I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, I love it. Like, listen, we can talk about and we're going to talk a lot about the Apron and all the different rules and stuff, but I do love the help. Basically, if you're going to take the CBA and read all 700 pages, like you're going to drive yourself crazy. Like, you're not going to listen, that CBA is for like the lawyers out there and stuff. But the goal is to take the CBA and make it easier for people to understand it. And how do I go on TV and have a 40-second clip and talk about bird rights? Or how do I go on and talk about the Apron and use a touchscreen and show money and try to really simplify things? And that's the goal for me, is based on using my past experiences to kind of help. I don't care if you're a Cavaliers fan or a Laker fan or just a general fan, give you like an understanding of, the rules. And then also, like, I've worked for a team for 20 years too. I can kind of give you some perspective when we're going into the draft process or free agency, or how do teams handle certain things that trade speculation and everything like that here. So that's my 2-minute journey as far as how I went from a washed up football player to working for the Nets to breaking into the media at 42 years old.
Well, we're not that different in the sense that I'm 43 now. And I work primarily in radio. And I think that all the time, like when it got to the point where everybody started working remotely, it's just hard to imagine going back. And
Yeah.
and you having the journey that you did, where now it's like there's got to be a part of you that's like, okay, I know you're not technically your own boss, but in a way you've created your own thing. You're working where you want to work. It's I look at kind of what you're doing, and now it's just evolved to this place where it's like, okay, news breaks about a trade. Your first stop might be Shams, but the very next thing in order is, okay, go see what Bobby's saying to understand the kind of mechanics of stuff for the people who are inclined to understand the financial side.
Well, and that's the goal. It's like kind of for the golfers out there, it's like trying to just hit straight down the fairway, right? Like that really. Listen, we live in a world where there's a lot of hot takes out there and stuff. Like my goal is not to go out and when Cleveland trades for Donovan Mitchell and be like, oh my God, why did Utah do this? Right. Like we have a lot of people that can do that. My goal is to kind of give you the perspective of why Utah did it or why Cleveland did it and what their finances look like and how they can add players, or when we go into this offseason and Nikola Jokic can say, like, we need more depth, and I can write about how they can go about getting more depth. Like we do our annual offseason articles every year. Everyone gets a big kick out of it because they're like, oh my God, give mercy to that team. They just lost. Why do we have that out? And like, listen, if you're a Cavs fan and you just won 64 games and you lose in the second round, yes, there is some like, I don't feel like reading about Cleveland after we just lost game 5 at home. But I do want to know, like, what can they do this offseason, right? Like we're in this uncharted territory because like for Cleveland, for me, is very comparable to when I worked for the Nets in going into the summer of 2013. And why I say this is we had a new CBA in 2000, and going into the summer of 2012, we had a new CBA that started in 2011. And the rules were ridiculously restrictive. And basically it was an overhaul. Every CBA is usually like an amendment. Like, this one is kind of an amendment. We've got the Apron rules. Okay. But a lot of the other things stayed. 2011 basically overhauled the system. And we all had basically 2 weeks to learn it before free agency started in December. So, and for us in New Jersey, we were always a cap space team, right? Like we were always a team that operated, well, we go out and trade for Joe Johnson and Darren, like all these different moves. And now we're like a luxury tax team and the rules change, right? Now we can't use these certain exceptions. And I say that because that's kind of like where Cleveland's been, right? Like you have never paid the tax. I think the last year was when LeBron was there, his last year in Cleveland. The rules have changed now, right? Now we're like talking about the apron, second apron. Like you've been sitting at home last summer, like, oh, apron, we never have to worry about that, right? And then like all of a sudden,
Tai Jerome, very real now. I mean, even if
Tai Jerome is finishes second and 6th man of the year, and you're like, oh my God, can I keep this guy? What happens with the apron? So now it's basically like it's like educating people as far as people maybe who haven't maybe pushed certain rules to a side for right now. But now all of a sudden you're in this territory where like, I need to know how this works. And the goal for me is to educate people. Like we'll probably do another apron video a little bit closer to free agency, just kind of giving you an understanding of everything with that. And, certainly on this, podcast, we'll go over as far as what Cleveland can do. But yeah, for me, that's the goal, is just to probably try to give you education. Every once in a while when I'm cranky, you'll get a hot take from me and stuff like that. But yeah.
Well, I've got a load of questions. So I think a place to begin is you alluded to the idea of twice now, the Cavaliers have been sort of, I don't know if you want to say victims necessarily, but there have been significant changes in the CBA that have impacted them negatively.
Yep.
First, there was the no cap smoothing Kevin Durant circumstances, which clearly changed probably what could have been a longer run of championships. And then I think debatably, while the Cavs had knowledge there was maybe a new CBA coming, they may not have known what it entailed in 2022 when they traded for Donovan Mitchell. I'm curious if, given what we know now about the CBA, if you think that the Cavaliers fully understood, two-part question.
Yeah.
One, do you think the Cavaliers understood what was awaiting them when they traded for Donovan Mitchell? And two, put into the shoes of a front office member, would you have approached that trade the same way? Do you think it was prudent given what we know about the CBA now?
I would say that all teams had an understanding that there were rules coming. Like there was going to be how the league looks at it when they basically keep a notebook of requests from team changes. We went through a period where Golden State and Eclipse basically blew through the luxury tax, right? Like, so if you're a Cavaliers fan, you go out and blame those two teams for the reason why. And maybe add Brooklyn.
That's not,
and add Brooklyn a little bit to that. And so the league is thinking, all right, how do we make it more punitive? And how do we restrict teams from adding to their roster outside their own players, right? Like, how do we do that? Like, they're not telling you you can't draft a player and keep them. They're not telling you that you can't sign a player to an extension, but they're telling you eventually you're going to come to a decision where you're going to have to choose what's important to you. We're kind of at that point this summer with Cleveland here. So I would say, no, they knew that there was going to be rules eventually put in place. I don't think any of us knew that the apron levels and how restrictive they were. I mean, you go back to Josh Kroenke in Denver, and he's basically said, hey, we built this roster under a different CBA. Right? Like they went out and traded for Aaron Gordon and signed Michael Porter Jr. to a max and Jamal Murray and all those different rules. And they did. And I would say with Cleveland, I mean, you did the Donovan trade in 22. You got Jarrett before that, I believe. That was part of the Harden deal, which was a great trade. Evan and Darius are draft picks. Max is part of this, Max is assigned, so you've added stuff along here. So I do think they do know that there's an understanding. I do think though that there are a lot of us, including myself, until I saw the term sheet that came about in April of 23, none of us knew that there was going to be this tiered apron level with all these punitive restrictions as far as how you can add or how you can't add to your roster moving forward.
Let's talk a little bit about that. I'm going to add a graphic to the screen here for those of you who are watching on YouTube. For those of you on the audio world, just flip over to there. You'll be able to see a lot of this stuff. I want to talk a little bit about second apron consequences. Now, I put together a graphic here where I just arbitrarily rank them in order of what I consider the most prohibitive given the Cavs circumstances. The first of these things is that you can't sign buyout players who made more than non-taxpayer mid-level. I don't think that's a big impediment.
No, because what happens, the buyout market's one of the more overrated processes, right? I mean, there's not that many, and those guys out there
last year. They got Marcus Morris the year before, but none of those guys were really meaningful that would be a deterrent for me to stay in the second apron. The second, which we'll get into in more depth here, is that if you finish a season, if we finish this next calendar season here over the second apron, then the 2033 first round pick for the Cavaliers is frozen. That is something that's discussed at length amongst Cavs fans, but I don't necessarily find that to be the scariest consequence to me. I think a lot of the other ones are significantly worse in my view.
Because the frozen one you can always get unfrozen, right?
Exactly.
Like if you're on good behavior for a couple of years, that eventually becomes unfrozen there.
Exactly. And we'll get into that in just a little bit here. You can only sign rookies in minimum contracts. Obviously, that makes things very difficult without the use of the exceptions and with the handcuffs that they put on the various trades. All those things make it basically that it makes it so that when you're in the second apron, you better hope that you have a good framework for a team constructed and hopefully viable depth, because the options that you have to add people are limited to essentially the draft, of which the Cavs have offloaded a lot of their draft assets, or minimum contracts, which typically aren't going to bring back the most desirable players. Now, the one thing that I do think bears discussion here is the idea of no salary aggregation. I rank these from top to bottom in terms of the biggest stuff is the stuff that I find the most concerning as a Cavs fan. And the no signing exceptions and no salary aggregation, I think are big obstacles to be able to shift anything on your team in a way that doesn't involve taking a significant step back in talent. And that's one of the things that's come up quite often here, because in the aftermath of this playoff run, there's a lot of discussion about, okay, different frameworks. Oh, try to get Giannis, try to get under this second apron. Then you flip Darius Garland. Maybe you combine him with a Jared Allen. All things you can't necessarily do in the second apron. That's why I am more hesitant than I think a lot of people are. I think a lot of people see those consequences and they say, man, that sounds terrible. We have to get out of the second apron.
Yeah.
But I don't know that getting out of the second apron, even if it's possible, even if you jump through the hoops to do it, necessarily puts you in any better position to go out and try to win a title. So given that list that I just put up, now I told you what my order was.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you look at these consequences, what you feel is the most prohibitive side effect of this CBA in terms of allowing these teams in the second apron to continue to compete.
The aggregation rules would be number one on my list. And so when we're talking about aggregation, it means combining contracts sent out, even if you're taking back less money. So if you're Cleveland and you wanted to trade a $15 million and a $17 million player and take back a player earning $28 million, you're not allowed to do that. That's a big one, right? And we've seen what's happened is we saw last year Phoenix ran into that problem a lot, where you weren't allowed to combine salary. You're basically, if you're trying to trade, Bradley Beal, for example, like you weren't allowed to include anything else with him. It's important for people who watch this that the apron rules go into effect based on your post-transactional salary, right? So like we saw this past year, Milwaukee was a second apron team. When they made a trade, they were allowed to like aggregate contracts, but the trade left them under the second apron. So basically, like as long as you fall under, the problem comes with if you're buried deep into the second apron, like you're basically acting as these are what the rules are. Like if you're like 6 or 7 million, like you can have some flexibility to maybe pull yourself. Like Boston's will have a hard time getting under the second apron unless they trade Kristaps Porzingis, for example. Like that's and unless they have to do like 2 or 3 trades here. The one thing that was not up there that I think I would put as number 2, sending cash in a trade. And here's why. If you're Cleveland and you've traded away, you've got to pick, you had 2 seconds this year. Yep. Let's say you're in a year where you want to go buy a second round pick. It's not allowed, because what happens now is that your second round apron is triggered. Like the apron's triggered in for the second. So if you're already 20 million over, like you're not going to go into the draft saying, hey, like if you're Denver, for example, Denver, let's say, who potentially could be like, hey, we can't go into the draft buying a second round pick. Like that, I think is, there's some restrictiveness to that. But I do think if we're ranking it, I would agree with you that the aggregation rule, and that's not just me talking, that's teams talking too, that is a punitive rule as far as for that.
Well, and here's the other thing I find frustrating, Bobby, is let's say, hypothetical world, you find a way to get under the second apron. There is immediately a bunch of stuff that if you do it,
at
the second apron, which would mean that you can't spend up into the second apron. So you could go through all these gymnastics to be able to do things like offload a Coro or Dean Wade or a DeAndre Hunter or whoever. You could get under there. You could say, okay, now we've got freedom. We finally have freedom. We're gonna combine Darius Garland and a Jared Allen. We're gonna go for this mega trade. And the moment you aggregate those salaries, second apron hard cap, you're right back with the same prohibitive rules that you were trying to wrestle with when you were in the second apron. Different forms of those rules, but still equally hard to navigate. So I think that's why there's so many things that have been discussed. There's one-person trades, a lot of Darius Garland frameworks that I've heard discussed, including from your coworker, Brian Windhurst. He spoke a lot on this subject. But when we get into these more far-fetched ones about, take out of the picture what the Cavs even have to offer to get into the running for a Durant or a Giannis, but just the obstacles that are involved in an environment where really the only team with a lot of cap space is Brooklyn. Yes, people could absorb players into exceptions. I understand that. But I look at a team in the apron like that. And when you go back just to last year's trade deadline, you have Nurkic had to have a first round bundled with him. You have Marcus Smart offloading them. They had to bundle a first with him. Even when Chris Middleton went to the Wizards, they had to give up a rookie and they had to give up draft assets. I don't think it's as easy as people think it is when it's essentially a buyer's market to just say, oh, we'll just find somebody to absorb, especially not in the case of a DeAndre Hunter who makes mid 20 million.
Yep.
Maybe you can find somebody to eat contracts like Dean Wade,
Yep.
maybe even an Okoro for second round picks, which is largely what the Cavs are in possession of. But I'm skeptical that a contract as big with as much time left on it as DeAndre Hunter would even be offloadable for anything less than a first round pick. And knowing how important it is for a lot of these teams to try to manage their tax burden and to get into striking range of being able to escape the second apron if they choose to. I wonder how you feel about the general market for guys like that and how expensive it would be should the Cavs get into a situation where they decide, okay, you know what? We don't think we're going to win a title with this group. We want to make big changes. Do you even believe that they have the assets necessary to do that in a short span of time?
Well, it's kind of just moving money around. Like, so if you have a decision like, hey, we really prioritize Tai Jerome to bring back, especially with the Garland injury, right? Like, do we have to sign him to a number and then, but it's contingent on moving off $14 million, right? Like, you're basically trading money for. I think this summer is challenging to do that. I've the 30 teams I've put into 4 tiers. There's basically Brooklyn in tier 1. They're the cap space team, right? They're kind of on an island by themselves. And then there's basically 16 other teams in that tier 2 who have the non-tax, which is at $14 million to take a player in a trade, or maybe these teams have trade exceptions and everything like that. And then there's a bunch that are in the 3rd and 4th where you're either an apron or second apron team. So it's not, if this was next summer where we could be looking at maybe half the league with potential cap space, I'd be like, yeah, this is a summer where you can offload. And that brings to the question, like, if you're in it, right, and you're willing to be in it, then how much are you willing to add to from a spending standpoint, from a luxury tax standpoint here? If you're 13 million in it and you figure, you know what, if we're going to get out of it, it's going to hurt our roster, right? Then you're thinking, okay, now we shift. Let's get rid of the second apron thought. We're already second apron teams. Okay, how much more do we want to spend to add to our roster? Because remember, the apron rules, as far as the triggers are reset every year, right? They don't trigger if you resign your own free agents. So you can blow past, you can keep on adding. Like, you sign Tai Jerome, the second apron doesn't trigger, right? So although we kind of talk about it like maybe a little bit of a hard cap, it's not when it's pertaining, as you said, rookie contracts, second round picks, minimums, and signing your own player, whether it be early bird or bird rights, and that facet. Then it becomes a cost issue, right? Like, now it's like, how much more are we willing to add by adding a player, by signing our player? That's what I said. It's like what it basically is. It's like if you're equating it to, if you have children, your child has all these toys. Now the league is coming in and saying, hey, instead of 5 toys in that toy box, you can only keep 3 now. Pick what 3 you want. And you're saying, no, I want all 5 because this one's broken for right now.
I bought all 5 of these. I should be able to keep all 5 of these.
Yeah, and you can, but they're going to say, but now instead of, that toy you bought instead of being $2 is now going to cost you $40, and you're going to have to pay me that to keep it. Yeah. So it's like, it's an interesting, and the hard part too is that I look at it when you're making trades and you're moving off money. It's like a Rubik's Cube, right? It looks good on your side. Like you get everything lined up. Like if Kobe in his front office, they get everything lined up. And then the other team is like, well, we can't take back this player because now the first apron is going to be triggered for us, right? Like it's like, and that's why we're talking like 3 teams or 4 teams. Why more teams get added to why did Utah get involved in the Doncic trade, right? And because they needed, the Lakers or Dallas needed money to be sent off somewhere else, and neither of them can take back more money. So that's where the complexities of adding teams there, as far as like, if you're going to start shedding money, all right, you better make it because it's a second apron decision and you're going to have a lot of flexibility. If you're not, then is it worth it to kind of depreciating what your roster could be?
Well, I'm going to pitch you 3 different angles here, Bobby, in regards to how we approach this moving forward, because they touch upon a lot of what you just said. Now, I think the Cavs, like you said, they're at a crossroads here where essentially they're well into the second apron. Do you lose depth? Because when they traded for Donovan, they gave up Lauri Markkanen, Colin Sexton. They gave up substantial depth, and I think that reared its head in that series against the Knicks, and it took the better part of a full season, the acquisition of Niang, Max Strus, to kind of rebuild the bench, rebuild the support players. We get to this postseason, it doesn't go as anyone would hope. But you're faced with these decisions about a Tai Jerome and a Sam Merrill where, yes, does it lower the tax bill if you let those guys walk? Sure. Does it get you out of the second apron? No. So you have to ask yourself the question, what do we do? The first option I wanted to pitch to you is the one I'm most in favor of. And of course, I'm a Cavs fan, so of course I want to continue to just spend somebody else's money in hopes that we can win a title. But this one I entitled Staying the Course. Now, with this pathway, I'll sell you on it from my perspective. We re-signed Ty and Sam at market rate. In my view, Ty's market rate is somewhere between Okoro's deal, which is $11 million a year, and the full early bird exception, which would be about 14.3, as you clarified on Twitter. Secondly, we don't avoid the second apron, as you said. We just ignore that. We're in it. That's what it's going to be. You pay a ton more in tax. If you bring back Ty and Sam, and in this assumption, Sam's market rate for me, I anchored it to the taxpayer mid-level exception because I assume there's plenty of teams who would offer them that. Not to say he couldn't get more. Maybe he could get a room exception level type deal somewhere in the 8 to 9 million range. I don't know. I guess it would depend on the market. And then this is the other point that I wanted to talk about here, because I don't think Cavs fans realize if you double down and you say, Ty, Sam, come back, you sign them to 2-year deals, because an early bird deal, it would have to be a minimum of 2 years anyway. But just from an approach standpoint, if you can keep them anchored alongside Donovan Mitchell to line up with when he has his player option deal, you have a lot of escapability where entering the season of 2027-28, you could conceivably be well outside the second apron, which will be important in terms of unfreezing picks and those things down the line. Now, I laid together how that would look on a cap sheet in this assumption. You know, Ty Jerome and Sam Merrill, I put their figures here. I assume they were 2-year deals because if you look to the far right column, 27-28, that is the year when you could potentially escape that. When you look at the tax bill, it's astronomical if you go this route. I mean, you let Sam and Ty walk, you can keep that tax bill to roughly $100 million. You don't let them walk, and that extra, I was just talking about 14 and 6, to add $20 million in salary for those two, you are adding to your tax bill by nearly $100 million. Now, this is the course I prefer because I'm not Dan Gilbert. I don't have to spend that tax money. But more importantly, it allows you to retain the most depth possible. So that's my preferred route. Now, I wanted to address the other one that you brought up, which was, what if we let Sam and Ty go? In that route, they walk away. You decline Chuma's option. You replace it with a veteran minimum ring chaser just because it's slightly less money, and I don't think anybody's particularly attached to Chuma. He barely played. You don't avoid the second apron. Also, in this set of circumstances, you shrink your tax bill this season by nearly $100 million, and the following season, you would shave nearly $116 million off of your tax bill. And again, just like in the previous version, you have the capability to escape the second apron entering the 2027-28 season. Now, in this version, again, you'll see that Ty and Sam aren't on the lineup, aren't on the roster sheet here, but you backfill this roster up to the 14 guys with veteran minimum people. I left 2. Now, this is one of the questions I wanted you to clarify for me, Bobby, because what I was wondering is, I used the veteran minimum figure for 2 guys here. That's the $2.296 million. The second round draft choices, I've noted oftentimes, like take Kyle Filipowski. He signed, as a second round pick, he signed a deal that was $3 million in average value. this figure, which is also the exact same as the quote incomplete roster charge, is that the figure that you could anticipate as a first-year salary for 2 second-round picks, assuming that the Cavs, they press them on the idea that, guys, we need you to sign for the minimum here. We're not going to pay you more than this. This is what's available to you if you want to sign a roster spot. And the other question I have for you is, if you just sign an undrafted free agent, is he held to that same 0 years of service figure, the 1.272?
So regarding the picks, so there's the second-round pick exception. Filipowski was a little bit different because I believe Utah wound up using cap space to sign him. So you have the option of either using the second-round pick exception, or if you're Utah, if you want to go out and use cap space on him and give him a bigger contract because maybe he thinks he's a first-round pick and you're going to reward him and you have the flexibility. Second-round pick exception is, yes, 0 years of service. You do have the flexibility or the ability to negotiate up to 2 years of service. Rarely does that happen. Tyler Kolek, for example, in New York, wound up signing for the second-round pick exception in his first year was at 2 years of service. The majority of players who were second-round picks and signed these exceptions came at 0 years of service in the first year. So I would say, especially where Cleveland is at with 49 and 58, like later, usually those are that
happy to be here.
Yeah, or they're 2-8, right? But where you are financially, you would probably slot them in as roster players here. If you signed a undrafted free agent for cap purposes, they would come at that 127 number, right? However, they have a thing we call a luxury tax variance. For tax purposes, you would get charged for 2 years of service.
That's what I was wondering. I've seen that and I didn't understand it. I'm like,
credit.
So basically, when you sign a vet man like a Tristan Thompson, he'll make more than $2 million, but against the cap, he counts at $2 million. What you're saying is that even if you sign guys who have less than 2 years of service, for tax purposes, they will count as 2 years of service guys?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well,
if you're a player, like if you want to go out and sign a player, Tyus Jones, for example, and he's a 10-year plus guy, and he's at the minimum, and his minimum number is 3.6, for example, and you just sign him to a 1-year contract. For tax and cap purposes, you get charged as a player at 2 years of service. Player still earns at 3.6. He'll get the difference is that the league will reimburse him that difference.
And the logic there is to level the playing field and not incentivize teams going away from signing more seasoned veterans.
Exactly. They don't want you just loading up on 0 years of 1 year of service players. However, if you wanted to sign
42-year-olds and just pushing them out the pasture.
If you wanted to sign Tyus Jones to a 2-year deal, then that's different because then you're getting hit with the full amount. So instead of coming in at 2.2, you're coming in at 3.6, which you probably want to avoid.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, every dollar seems to count in this. So the one thing I didn't show in the previous is in the trim the fat version. Remember, I said before the tax bill was almost $225 million just for bringing back Ty and Sam at what their perceived market rate is. Yeah. By letting them walk and replacing them and backfilling with minimum salaries, you can cut that tax bill by nearly $100 million. So those were the first two that I think are the most realistic possibilities. Now, the third is strictly to cater to the doomers out there, and that's what I call the burn it down path. And that's for the people who think, okay, we need to do everything possible to get under the second apron. Now, I don't agree with this philosophy, but in this version, you don't re-sign Ty or Sam. You trade players that you consider expendable into others' team space. You'll have to use assets to do so. In an effort to get below the second apron, you sign 6 minimums to reach 14 roster spots. And if you do all of this, if you use 0 years of service guys, you would be under the second apron by roughly $1.3 million. Now, keep in mind, there's going to be transactions that probably take place during the year. You would not have the ability to do things like, we're just going to wait. We'll just add this buyout. We'll pay him a little extra. We'll do those things. None of those things would be available to you. You may be under the second apron, but you're right up against it with 14 roster spots where, again, 6 of them were filled with guys with no experience. Now, In a more realistic setting, I did what I called the ring chaser version, where they backfill with the 2 years of service guys, the Tristan Thompsons, the Tyus Jones of the world, and their figures are anchored to that 2.3-ish million. In that scenario, where you offload a Coro, you offload Dean Wade without taking a single dollar back. You let Tai Jerome, and you let Sam Merrill walk. You backfill with 6 roster spots, leaving you with only 8 rotation players. You're still over the second apron by about 3 million. So I use this to reinforce this idea and to dispel this notion amongst Cavs fans that there's a lot of people who believe that, once we get below the second apron, all our problems are solved. We can trade our way into a better team. And it's not the case. You would have to unload much more salary than you actually believe to truly have any flexibility at all. And so my contention here, Bobby, is and I think it largely agrees with, I heard you say this on your breakdown, and I couldn't agree more.
What sometimes infuriates me is that when a team loses in the second round, we're going to be shouting on the top of our lungs, we need to break this team up. You got to trade Darius Garland. You got to trade Donovan Mitchell. You got to trade Evan Mobley. You got to do all these, or Jared Allen. You got to do all these things. And sometimes you just got to get back on the horse and you got to do it again. I think it's certainly a different situation maybe in Boston.
And I couldn't agree with that more, because again, nothing substantially changes for 2027-28 in terms of our ability to escape the apron by going in this window where we've built this team that, despite their failings this season, the Cavs believe can compete. And everything Kobe did last summer, extending Jared Allen, bringing back Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland gets the max, Mobley gets the max. All of those things, even adding DeAndre Hunter at the trade deadline, all of those should signal that the Cavaliers want to continue to push towards a championship and add cost to do so. I have a hard time believing that after one injury-riddled second round where they underwhelmed, that all of a sudden the Cavs are going to just say, let's reset this process.
Yeah. I mean, that's listen, you won 64 games during the regular season. If you had won 48 games this year and you were a 4 seed or you're a 5th seed, I do think you have to take into consideration what you accomplished during the regular season. I know that doesn't, as I said, we don't give participation trophies out there. And I do think you have to take into consideration as far as where you were from a health standpoint here. You didn't go out and do the DeAndre Hunter trade just for like a quick hit for 3 months here. You pay the price now because of where his salary is coming in. So I do think you have to be careful with the burning it down process, or, basically the goal is to get under the second apron here. As I've said, you can be in the second apron and still have a good team. Like when I'm looking at their roster, I think second apron teams run into problems when you have no depth at all. So if you're looking at your roster and you've got 11 players under contract for next year, not including your second round picks and everything, and bringing back your 2 players, it's still workable as far as what you're able to do here. So I do think, as I said, like you do look at Indiana. I mean, Indiana, I know they're different financially here, but Indiana lost in this conference finals last year and basically elected to bring the group back, and they got swept. And they're 3 wins away from winning an NBA championship. Does that mean like you have to go out and just sit, Kobe has to go to the Hawaii in July and drink Mai Tais and not do anything? No, like you have to, there's some things you need to figure out. And certainly it starts with your free agencies. I would say this regarding like Tai, listen, he'll sign, if he signed with Cleveland and it's going to add whatever, $90 million of tax, we'll say, hey, their tax bill right now is like 200 million, whatever. Like, that's if they are at that position when the season ends. Like, just because you sign a player doesn't mean like you're stuck with that number, right? Like you can reassess where your roster is. Like, hey, maybe we need to move off Isaac in December.
And that's an argument people make about they term it, rolling the salary forward.
Yeah.
Assuming you can keep Tai at what people perceive as a positive value deal, that's not to say you're anchored to Tai forever. But you let him walk and all you can replace him with is a minimum contract. I think that's maybe a little foolish.
Yeah, I agree. Like it's going to be interesting. Like Tai's situation is interesting because Listen, the reality is that teams don't use their non-tax mid-level exception very much anymore, right? Like we saw last year, DeAnthony Melton was one of the few players that signed for the non-tax, which was at 12.9, and they did it at 1 year. Now, there are more teams in that position this year where they do have more money to go out and or more flexibility and need guards, right? When you're looking at Brooklyn or Sacramento or not Charlotte. Sacramento is one team. Atlanta needs a backup. Like, there's different, variances there as far as from a flexibility standpoint here. So with Tai, it's going to be interesting because it's like, yes, you can bring him back and it will cost you a lot of money, but I think the Garland situation almost makes him more of a priority than it was when we ended the season losing in 5 games to Indiana. Like it's because if you don't re-sign him, and listen, you could talk yourself into saying, well, we signed him and Sam at really low numbers and we found both players and we can do it again. Becomes a little you were in a different situation maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and so basically you let him go, and now you're competing with all the heavy, all the other teams that can only sign players to veteran minimums, the Lakers and Phoenix and Minnesota and Golden State. There's
speaking to that. It's funny that you say that, right? Because I was looking at the contracts, the minimum contracts. I'm bringing it up on the screen.
Yeah.
If you look at the sheer amount of Phoenix and Milwaukee players that show up on here, because they were at the time they were dealing with the second apron rules in Phoenix just last summer, Damian Lee, Mason Plumlee, Tyus Jones, Monte Morris, Bulbul, those were all guys on veteran minimums. And Milwaukee, they got Gary Trent Jr. and DeLon Wright and Taurean Prince. Some of these guys hit big. And I annotated the guys who logged more than 1,000 minutes. There are some huge wins in this group. Luke Cornett, of course, great value. Yabusele and Philadelphia, incredible season for him. But by and large, this idea that you have a lot of options. I mean, this name isn't exactly an inspiring list of people. And that's what the Cavaliers will be up against as they look to add if they let some of these talented players walk away. So while I understand the realities of, the tax can be burdensome, I think you have to look at it like this wasn't this build. It didn't start with Donovan Mitchell. It started when LeBron left, and it took a long time to get to this point. So while there very well may be a shelf life here in a couple of seasons, yes, when Donovan has a player option, it's going to be super prohibitive to carry multiple, like 3 different max salaries on top of a Jared Allen making a ton of money, on top of a DeAndre Hunter making a ton of money. But for these next 2 years, I think the best course of action is to just try to see through and does it mean you'll succeed? No, absolutely not. There's no guarantees of that. Only one team can win a title. But the idea that a 64-win season should lead you to make the changes that are being suggested are, okay, Tai has a bad series against the Pacers, and you discount the 3rd-place finisher for 6th man of the year, who you paid a minimum salary to perform those services. If you can get him to come back, if anything, I'm a little encouraged by the idea that maybe that took some of the shine off the apple, and that maybe in the long run, that'll mean that he gets retained for a little bit more reasonable of a figure. So I wanted to touch on the Tai Jerome thing here, because one of the questions I had was in regards to the early bird versus non-taxpayer mid-level. What is your perception of what the market for those guys would be? Both Sam and Tai, but we'll start with Tai. You said that there's somewhere around 16 teams with the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception. Did any of
those teams? It's a loose number because some of those teams are going to come off the board. Like we got Golden State in there, and if Kuminga comes back, and that eliminates them, and if Turner comes back to Indiana, that eliminates them. Right? It's based, a lot of it's contingent on what happens with their own free agents here. I would say the market for Tai, he'll have a market of outside of Cleveland here. If I was giving a comp, it would probably be comparable to what TJ McConnell signed for, and within a 4 for 44 an extension here. And maybe it's going to be a little bit more, and maybe we throw comps out the window and market dictate, or circumstances dictate as far as what a player gets based on what a team is willing to pay. I think if your teams, you have to, the ability of adding the rule where you can acquire a player by using one of your signing exceptions kind of changes the dynamics of free agency a little bit here. So in the back end, it used to be where if you had a non-tax mid-level, that's the only way that you can acquire a player or sign a player. Now you can trade into that exception. So what we've seen is everyone basically, wait a minute, I want to save that until we get into trade deadline and I can go out and acquire a player. And that's how Charlotte became involved as the third team in the Towns trade and wound up getting like 5 second-round picks because they used their room exception. And so that resource has become more of a, the ability to use it in trades also. So I do think if your team's out there and you need a backup point guard, and it's similar to like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, I know a different position. Like this is like Minnesota's in the same boat, right? Like basically like, hey, we sign these guys, we keep our depth, but we go, it's going to cost us as far as from a tax standpoint here. As I said, though, there's the non-tax has not been a way that teams have used to sign free agents. And really just the data shows it. I mean, Melton last year was really the only big guy, and it was a 1-year deal at 12.9. Like it's just not, I mean, maybe it will change this summer. Maybe there'll be teams more aggressive. Maybe Brooklyn comes in and says, we're going to give you the Bruce Brown contract, right? We're going to give you 2 years at $48 million. And the second year is going to be a team option, but we can get you $24 million in 1 year, right?
Yeah,
like, so
I wonder how much impetus there is for them to do that, because in my view, outside of trying to hit a salary floor or whatever the case may be, like when the Knicks got Marcus Morris back in the day, when they kind of struck out and they added him, and then a season later they flipped into the Clippers and got a first-round pick out of it. That, to me, similar to the Bruce Brown thing, is the scenario under which I could see Ty leaving, because outside of just not being happy as a backup, which again, with Darius's injury, he's now going to get serious run with the first unit for that period where Darius is rehabbing. It doesn't seem that threatening to me. I've kind of maintained this belief that, okay, with the money being more favorable in the early bird situation, should the Cavs choose to go to the wall in terms of what they can spend, and with the relationship with Hunter and with the success he had in Kenny's system, I'm optimistic that he could be retained. I wanted to play the clip from Kobe Altman that he spoke about, and see, I want you to play armchair psychologist here and tell me how you would take this answer, if it makes you feel more optimistic that they're going to bring back Ty and Sam, or less optimistic.
Love to keep. I mean, listen, we're hopeful. I would say that part of Kenny's system, which is, again, we're always going to be rooted in player development, which is great. And so when guys find that confidence in this system, their value gets driven up. Same thing with Sam Merrill. You want to call these guys end of bench players before that have become real rotational players and valuable within the ecosystem, not just us. The good news is they're going to do really, really well for themselves. And the good news is also is that we know, because of our program, we're going to be able to continue to develop our end of bench guys to become rotational guys. That's going to be part of our evolution, and also how we navigate some stiff penalty taxes. We have to continue to develop from within. And those two stories are incredible success stories from development programs and putting them in a position to be successful. And so, yes, we'd love to keep Ty, but we'll see what the marketplace holds.
It was a roller coaster of emotions for me
there. Well, it's interesting. That was before the Darius too. So I don't know. I would think things changed a little bit. My putting my GM hat on, reading through the tea leaves is, yes, they would like to re-sign them, but we've done a really good job of finding players like Tai Jerome and Sam Merrill before. And if we have to, we can do it again. And we can develop them into that role that, I don't know, I think that's kind of where you're looking at it, where you're kind of like hedging your bet. Like, hey, we really want to bring these guys back, but if it becomes cost, substantial, but like, the one thing that wasn't played in there, and I found the quote from his interview also, just because I was writing some things, is he also has, he talked about the luxury tax, right? So, and he said like, hey, Dan's given us Dan Gilbert has given us the blessing to go into the luxury tax and spend into the luxury tax if we have to, and everything like that. So, yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing. It's like people always say, like, why is Boston spending their tax bill is so high, is that we're going to get implemented this new tax system here, whereas you see, like, it doesn't cost you as much if you're in that first two bracket buckets there. But when you get to that third, and then when you keep on adding, it's more cost, financially impactful. And that's not even, listen, if you're a repeater tax team, which is, 4 years in a row, teams like Boston is one of them this year.
Now, to be clear, because we got under the tax last year, we would be a repeater team for at least 3 more seasons, correct?
Yes. And that was a big reason why, certainly getting DeAndre in the trade was beneficial basketball wise, but it basically helped. It paused the clock, right? It paused the financial clock until this upcoming year.
Now, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the freezing the pick thing, because I think it coincides. This notion of the repeater tax is, okay, you want to get out of the tax before the real consequences kick in. It's a similar mindset with the freezing of picks, because if the Cavs make it to the end of this season and their 2033 first-round pick is frozen, they then have to be out of the tax, under the apron there for 3 of the next 4 years. So what I laid out here was a graphic, which, again, you should watch this on YouTube, audio listeners, if you haven't, because there's a lot of visuals here, because it's a dense subject matter. But in all likelihood, both their 2033 and 2034 pick will be frozen, as they will be in the apron the next couple of years. But there is a very easy, very straightforward runway. If they're out of the apron the 3 following years, which they could be if they do decide to pivot or move away from a Donovan Mitchell or offload one of their younger players, they'll be able to, by the season of 2029-2030, unthaw both the 2033 first and the 2034 first, because they would have been under for 3 of 5 years, which is the requirement, as I understand it, to unfreeze those draft picks. So that's part of the reason. And Bobby, you can clarify if I've misunderstood.
No, you hit it right on the head. I mean, I think the one thing too to clarify, and we talked about this offline before we went on, and I wrote about it, and then when you do more research and you talk to more people, is that you're allowed to, let's say you're 2000, and the picks don't become frozen until after you finish how the draft rules work is you operate under a 7-year, right? We work in a 7-year vacuum. So once we get through this year's draft, then we look from 2026 to 2032, right? Like that's our 7-year where you can trade picks and everything. We're talking about if Cleveland finishes this upcoming season over the second apron, 2033 becomes frozen, right? And that's not done until after you get through the season, because as I said, we're working under this 7-year window.
We could trade someone mid-season out of it. So
yeah. And the one thing is that you are allowed to trade, if let's say your 2032 pick gets frozen, you are allowed to trade 31, because remember, you're always going to have that pick in 32. It just becomes frozen. Like you just can't trade it. So basically the rule is, Stepien rule is that you can't trade picks in back-to-back years if it leaves you basically without a pick.
Okay, so that's an important clarification, listeners. A lot of you emailed me and asked me that specific thing. You asked me if they froze the 2033 pick. You asked me, well, can they still trade the 2032 or the 2030?
Yes.
And what Bobby is saying is yes.
Yes, because you're always going to have it. It's just frozen. You just can't trade it. Like if your pick, here's the thing, if your pick becomes frozen, okay, you won't be able to pick swap it. Okay. Yeah. Like you wouldn't be able, like that's you're basically that thing is
real dumb.
Yeah. That thing just becomes right. That thing just becomes you won't be able to do it, but you would be able to move your 2032 pick if 33 becomes frozen.
So okay, one last question for you, and I'll let you go here.
Yeah.
You're the GM of the Cavs. 2 seasons from now, entering the Donovan Mitchell player option year, which, by the way, I mean, he may come back, which changes the scenario. But 2 seasons from now, you get to that point where a lot of these contracts come off the books or can be taken off the books. How would you approach it at that point to maximize? Because the other concern that I see all the time from Cavs fans is, okay, we did the NFL model here. We had Darius Garland and Evan Mobley on rookie deals. Yeah. We brought in an established superstar who was on a big contract to take advantage of when they were most financially flexible to do so. And now everybody's getting paid. How do you extend this window post the Donovan Mitchell contract to maximize Evan Mobley's prime so that hopefully he could still be contending for titles even after a potential departure a couple seasons from now of a Donovan Mitchell maybe, or of a trade of a Darius Garland or whoever, how would you best set up this Cavs team, knowing what you know now, to be able to stretch their championship contention window as far as possible?
That's a great question. It's almost like you're going to have two iterations of the roster, right? You're going to have this year, this 25 to 27 group, right? Like from the 3-year or 2-year window group. And then basically you're going to have a different version when we get to probably Donovan's player option, or maybe the following year, where it's like, who are your core pieces that you're going to build around? Because the reality is that you're in the danger zone if you're going to pay Donovan Mitchell 35% of the salary cap when he's, I don't know however old he's going to be. Like,
it could turn into the Damian Lillard situation.
Yeah. So you have to be careful of that, but it's also like kind of what Boston's going through, right? Boston's going through, like, they won a championship, but we're probably going to look at some different faces here, but you'll still have Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and probably likely Derek White on your roster, right? Like, so you're protecting your 3 core guys, but it's like, how do you keep on adding to your roster here? And that's why, like, we go through, whether it be resigning your own free agents or going through the process, bringing back Tai, because the one thing you don't want to do is always go through a period where you're basically signing 7 players to veteran minimum contracts, and then you're doing it again the following year. Like, that just starts the cycle here. But yes, you do have an eye towards, okay, what happens when we do get to that player option year, when Donovan becomes free agent? Like, what will our roster look like if the goal is still to have Evan and Darius, for example, or whoever your 2 core guys are, and how you can add to your roster here. So as I said, it's like, you have to be prepared for, like, we all operate kind of in a 3-year window. So we're in this 3-year window right now, but you also have to have a kind of an idea of like what's going to be after that. Like, it's almost like LeBron and Luka, right? Like, how do you prepare for now with LeBron on your roster, but also have an eye on, like, eventually this guy's going to retire, and we need to be prepared for what this roster is going to look like.
Well, to that point, people fret about the frozen pick, and sometimes I think that's an unintended benefit of this CBA, because if you have a world, we've existed in a world with LeBron where we traded everything and anything to try to compete with him. And then when he left both times, the cupboard was pretty bare, and it took a while to dig out. Now, this rebuild went fairly quickly, but in a world where we move into the future, I don't think it's the worst thing to not be offloading 2031, 2032, 2030, like all these picks, when you're still hoping that you're able to contend and compete as Evan Mobley approaches 30, as he hits his early 30s. You want to be in some situation where you still have assets to draw from. So I haven't been that deterred by the frozen pick, because in some ways, I'm like, much like the Stepien rule, I think in some ways it unintentionally could protect ourselves from literally emptying everything in the cupboard just to try to maximize a window, which we've seen the past 2 seasons. Doesn't matter who's on the roster. If they get hurt in the playoffs, things can go badly quickly. And to push the chips into the table for what may be a 1 or 2 year window, I don't think you have that much control over it. So you just try, you put your best foot forward, assemble the best, deepest team you can, you try to win, and you accept the results. But I do think that'll be interesting to see how they approach that option year of Donovan Mitchell in terms of what plays out over the next 2 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, I mean, I think we'd be in a world of trouble if contracts were 7 years, right, or 8 years, or they're Major League Baseball. Yeah, listen, if we lived in a world where it was Major League Baseball and we're signing guys to 10-year, $400 million contracts, and we still have these frozen pick rules, you have to make it a really good effort to be in the second apron like 4 years or 5 years, or do it like consistently here. Like, there are eventually windows for you to get out, or eventually there are windows for you to retool your roster how you see fit. I think you also have to remember that the cap will increase. As the cap increases, the apron levels increase. So you do begin to get like breathing room. Basically what's happening is we're like Cleveland International Airport right now, where all the planes are backed up because there's a weather delay, right? Like, basically how the contracts all kind of, added in here. But as I said, the beauty of it, that most players are on 2 or 3 year contracts. Not many are on 5-year deals, except for a few, that you do begin to get like the, light at the end of the tunnel.
You get the benefit of the salary cap going up, but like Jared Allen's a perfect example. They extended him with 2 years left on his contract,
Mhm.
and they gave him $28 million, but it didn't kick in for 2 more seasons.
Right.
By the time that arrives, that $30 million, that $28 million, it will be such a smaller percentage of the cap that you will see meaningful impact on the cap sheet of the Cavaliers when they reach those points. So I think that's all super beneficial. Bobby, I took so much of your time. I was trying to do a half hour. You stay with me for an hour. And so next time the song will be longer and more glorious. Thank you so much for coming on the Fear the Fro podcast, for talking to the Cavs audience, and for, sharing your expertise on the Cavs and the CBA and everything that's going on.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Fear the Fro listeners, rate, review, do all that stuff. Check out the YouTube channel and head over to Bobby's offseason outlooks. The one thing I would recommend you all do is when you pitch these trades at me for the Cavs, you rarely, if ever, consider the other team's implications. The other team and the things that they're allowed to do. One of the best ways to fill in those gaps is to watch the outlooks for the other teams that Bobby puts together. And a lot of those discussions you can find on YouTube as well, right alongside the Fear the Fro podcast. So, Bobby, thanks again. I hope to talk to you again, and I hope we can bring you back as a guest in the future when the Cavs win the championship, preferably.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll chop this up. I'll throw it up, and I'll tag you and everything. Bobby,
That's
really,
good.
I loved having you on, and I'm so grateful that you pushed whatever you had actually meant to be doing to finish out this interview.
Oh, it's all good. I just had to do ESPN radio, but it's all good.
Well, thank you so much. You ever need anything from me, let me know.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And you have a great night.